Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to part 2 of your program, Real Talk. This is your program. I do this to try and bring issues and subjects that I hope will provide some information, some guidance, some advice, and some questions about how we, as a Muslim community living in the United Kingdom, a beautiful country that we have the pleasure of living in, how we as citizens of the UK take advantage of disadvantage of the country that we're in, the systems, the opportunities, the disadvantages, the challenges that we all face. Today we've been talking about the criminal justice system, and particularly Muslim women in prison. And as in the first part of the program, my guest Sophie Bansi, who's been on this program a few times, she's done a lot of research about Muslim women in prison, why they end up in prison, what happens when they go inside, and how they get supported both externally and internally, and some of the lack of support that exists for Muslim women in prison compared to what is available for men when they go into prison and when they come back. And I have with me very kindly Sister Farah, who has been in prison and has come out, fortunately, and now is trying to lead a normal, healthy, productive life as well. But those, and as we talked about at the beginning, sometimes our communities do not help rehabilitate our own people into communities themselves. And often more in the past, when Sophie and I have spoken about this, women have had to actually move away from the local areas in order to rebuild their life. And one of the things that Sophie and her team do is they've got this resettlement hub in Bradford, which helps Muslim women coming out of prison rebuild their lives again. So Sophie, this hub is based at the Kismet Centre, which is a local community centre in Bradford. I've been there many, many times, and I have a lot of respect for that and some of the amazing work that you do. What does this help do to help people like Farah rebuild their lives?
I think initially we were writing many reports, as you've said, about this subject matter, and one of the things that was really missing was post-release this quandary and dilemma that Muslim women had in terms of where do you go out, where do you seek support, where are the specialist services, because sometimes it can be quite embarrassing coming out of prison and then approaching providers, housing, benefits, employers to say, well, I've been to prison and I have a conviction, would you be happy to house me, or would you be happy to allow me a volunteering opportunity?
Or a job.
Yeah, a job. And quite often women would say, well, it's already shameful enough that I've been in that position, and I feel like I'm reliving my reincarceration, having to repeat this again and again and again to different providers.
Second punishment, isn't it?
Of course, yeah. And we speak about this, as you're aware, in the reports about, the second sentence, which they call the community sentence. So we thought, as a community, the biggest ownership we can take is to rebuild something within a mainstream community centre within our own communities and say, actually, there is an acceptance of the issue. We admit to the fact that Muslim women are going to prison. And so Kidmat Centres was extremely brave, quite pioneering, and said, yeah, let's have a resettlement hub here. And within this hub, Muslim sisters that are returning back, especially to the Bradford area or surrounding area, can come here. And we have specialist advisors that work around housing, benefits, volunteering. We've spoken in the past that encouragingly 2 of our women that have come through the system are probation officers themselves now. So we're really able to turn it back around, and I think I pride the Muslim community on the fact that they've taken ownership of this, not just through the research, but having built a model within our own communities. Within that model, again, there's things that we do with a lot of the masajid around here, whether that is family mediation, and sometimes what plays out for the women, these issues that we've spoken around shame and dishonour and being marginalised, it's more cultural and in some parts patriarchal. Islam doesn't say anywhere that you cannot be forgiven.
Yes, Islam is a very forgiving religion.
Of course.
As long as you do it genuinely, and that's fine.
Yeah, that authenticity. So we're able to then do some mediation with families. We're able to have women speak to any of the Molanas, Muftis, Alimas, whoever they're comfortable with, to discuss their situation. And that spiritual healing then also begins as well. And I think our model factors in many of the cultural and religious nuances that perhaps those in the mainstream can't understand.
Right. I mean, Farah, obviously, very brave coming here, sharing your life experience both in the prison, the criminal justice system, and then in prison. Now, when you were in prison, did you want to sort of have a prayer facility halal food. Obviously, everyone would want to have halal food facility as well. Did you find that the prison service accommodated some of your requirements, your wishes and your needs?
I think they did when I needed it,
Right.
but I think as a whole, then probably not.
Right.
The main issues that I needed was either mental health
Right.
or just someone to talk to, then no.
The prison is recruiting more and more Muslim chaplains in the system. Did you have access to a female Muslim chaplain, or was it
Yes.
a male chaplain?
It
or-
was a female
It was
chaplain.
a female. So you
Yes.
had a female chaplain.
Yes.
And were they working full time or were they working part time? So you didn't have access to them all the time or not?
No, not all
Right.
the time.
Right. And how do you find that particular connectivity with the
I
female
think it was
chaplain?
helpful because you learn a bit more about Islam, and they have these Friday chaplaincy services where you can go on Friday, but obviously it's for a set time to a set time, but it's always on a Friday. But I think a lot of that helped as well.
Right. And did that, being in prison and being in a confined space, for example, give you more time and opportunity to explore the faith of Islam, while you were there?
It did, and it didn't, because I think there was a longer version, because what I went through, I thought Islamically it was acceptable, that I thought that was what Islam says, that
Right.
what I went through in my life was acceptable in Islam, but
Right.
it wasn't, it's not acceptable, so yeah.
Right, okay, so we'll come back to that some other time. But in terms of improvements to the experience of Muslim women in prison, I presume you and Sophie and others have had to chat, and you've been able to share some of your thoughts, your concerns, the deficits in the service that they provide.
Yeah.
Are those, Sophia, I presume are they reflected in the report as well?
Yeah, they're quite.
And how have they been welcomed by the institution, the prison institution?
I think we know that the wheels of the institution grind quite slowly, and I think it takes a lot of time. As I was saying, David Lammy's review, I know many years after his review, when he went back to visit his recommendations.
For my audience, when I say David Lammy, who's the current Foreign Affairs Minister, when he was in opposition, did a review of sentencing of people of colour, black and ethnic minority people, to see whether they were getting fair treatment in the criminal justice system. And that report, as Sophia said earlier, proved very clearly that there was some disparity in the way people of colour were being sentenced, treated by the criminal justice system. And as Sophia said, in some cases, if you're a Muslim, you get even more badly treated by the criminal justice system.
Unfortunately, I think that there's more of an understanding of Islamophobia now. There's reports on use of force in custody, pava spray, things like that. So I think when we find projects like Muslim Women in Prison and other projects quite similar to it moving into the system, they can more easily recognise some of those disparities in the treatment, or sometimes those people from our backgrounds can be a little bit more open in speaking to us as well. So unfortunately, very much the inequality of treatment is there for people of colour, but then more pronounced when you're Muslim on top of that, and layered, and as we've seen, very unfortunately, sometimes these things can be quite insidious the way they play out for our communities. We've seen that over the summer as well. So I think being in the system and staying in the system is something that is required and very necessary, because your physical visibility as the Muslim Women in Prison project in there also not only gives encouragement to those people that we're serving and the chaplaincy department, who we work extremely closely with, but it also produces a level of accountability for providers in there to say, actually, we're here, and you're able to then advocate on the rights of the women, the requirements, and slowly just push against the gate as and when required.
I mean, do you feel that it's taking quite a lot of time to bring about those changes? I mean, people like Ishtiaq and myself have been fighting discrimination for 40 odd years, more than 40 years, and we still feel that we've not got anywhere. Do you feel so those pushback from the institution itself?
I think naturally, as I've said, there's a hesitancy for institutions to admit. We see this across the board. We see this, Iqbal, in policing, you see it in the judiciary, you see it in prisons, probation. They all have independent inspectorates as well, who, you know, review their work and review some of the outcomes for those prisoners. But as communities, I think some of the struggles that we have as a Muslim community is not having the capacity, the funding, the human resource to go in there and challenge. And that will only be produced where, you know, I believe some of our Muslim charity sector enable us to do some of that. And I'm not saying go in all guns blazing and heavy-handed, of course there's not a requirement for that, but go in a way which is very balanced. Now, when I've taken feedback from many of our elders, whether it's, you know, yourself, Ishtiaq Bhai, Uncle Shirazam, you know, our board members, and they have said actually there's huge strides that have been made by the Muslim Women in Prison project. To say in 2013 nobody was openly using the word Muslim women in prison. You know, as you're aware, we're collaborating with two major universities on the outside, Leeds Beckett and Sheffield Hallam, to write our current report on young Muslim girls under 25. So there is some institutional ownership, and by institutions I mean academia. We work quite closely with HMIP and other people to continue to gently push at the system and say this is what's achievable, but you must pay attention to this. But as you've seen on the news recently as well, there's a lot happening in prison.
Oh, there's a lot happening, and there's a huge underfunding as well.
Yes.
Now in Farah, obviously having been inside and, you know, experienced the prison life itself, when you come out of now that you're out of the system, you got people like Sophie and her team, Resettlement Hub, helping you to rebuild your life. If they were not there, what would happen to somebody like you?
Definitely not sat on a sofa today.
Sorry?
Definitely not sat here today.
No.
Because I don't think I could have faced it alone.
Right.
Especially coming out young as well. So it's a difficult, because I don't know if there's services for me or whether I would have accessed a service if I needed it. So I don't think I would have survived.
So when you know, when they say to you, all right, now you're ready to go, you can go out into the world, the big world out there.
Yeah.
Is there any support mechanism for prisoners who are being released?
They don't tell you the support services that are out there.
Right.
So I think you're expected to find it on your own. So for me personally, I don't think I would have accessed any support. I don't think I would have even been alive.
Right.
Because
oh my goodness.
it's one of them difficult ones, because I've never lived alone in my life. So it's first time, and yeah, I don't think I would have managed.
Because we know that, you know, I mean, recently when they've released all those prisoners to create space in the prison service, quite a few have gone back in again.
Yes.
Because as soon as they come out,
It
they
was
re-offend.
it was the lack of support.
Yeah.
So they released them early to address the overcrowdedness of the prison.
Yes.
But you're releasing them in this unknown world where where you're not telling them the services or where to access it.
Right.
So they're in this vicious circle where they're going to come back around, re-offend and go, because that's what they've known and that's where they're comfortable.
And that was not open to you, going back to where
No.
you came from, because, you know, so in those circumstances, like you say, would have been really, really challenging. I mean, I'm sure you must be seeing quite a few of similar cases as well in your work, I presume.
Yeah, absolutely. I think relocation is one of the current patterns in our research with Leeds Beckett and Sheffield Hallam universities that we're finding, and it's a very unknown concept, because probation services very often will say send them back to where they came from, because there's familial patterns there of friendship, of knowing the area, of knowing how to navigate yourself. But this pattern of relocation we're finding is quite common amongst the Muslim women that we work with, and again that's because of, I believe, perceived or real honour and shame, women wanting a fresh start, women not wanting to be judged, and definitely not wanting to face what we call the second sentence, which is community gossip, or people always alluding to your crime, and especially the mothers that we have coming to us. They say, you know, I don't want anybody to turn around and say to my children in the schoolyard that your mum was in prison, or anybody being malicious. So I think there's a lot for these women to address, and much of that is internalised, because the help and support and the ability to speak up, to seek timely help and support is just not there. So we find that many women just say, even if it's such a scary thought and such a scary prospect, even for either of us to go to a new city and start again on your own, but they would rather that than sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes go back to where they started.
Right. And obviously, as you say, Farah, that was not an option for you. So you had to Are there any other similar projects being developed around the country? Are you doing any work in other parts of the United Kingdom where we can develop a resettlement hub for Muslim women in prison? I mean, Bradford, for example, mashallah, we have a very large community.
Yes.
We have a huge business community in Bradford.
Yeah.
And, you know, they employ hundreds and thousands of people across all sorts of industry.
Yeah.
Is there any work going on in helping people like Sister Farah and others to rehabilitate themselves, find jobs, etc.? Is that something that needs to be to actually developed and promoted?
I think it does need to be developed, certainly, and I think part of the reason that we talk about Muslim women and what's led them into the criminal justice is to begin to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that's hidden and out of sight and people assume it's something very heinous that they've done. Sometimes life just leads people to situations or circumstances does, but we truly believe that everybody deserves a second chance. So one of the reasons we're so open in our dialogue and our report launches, as well as some of our film screenings, is because we want people to try and understand what has led people there. And I think we have close relationships with some of the organisations here where we're able to signpost women for volunteering or for the start of employment opportunities. We look at disclosures, how do you safely disclose? And we do look at certain mainstream organisations that we know are open to employing prison leavers, and hopefully we could start that conversation within the Muslim community as well and open up that passageway. As I've said, some of our women are doing phenomenal work now, not just in probation services but in mental health, in the business sector. Some have gone up to set their own businesses up.
Wow,
Yeah.
wonderful. Right. I mean, obviously, one of the questions that, you know, people we spoke about this very early on. The notion that somebody goes into prison, the automatic association is that they must have done something very, very serious to end up in prison, right? But like you say, some women are going to prison for very minor crimes, like not paying the TV license.
Yes.
You know, and I remember in the first program when you mentioned it, I was shocked and horrified that people are ending up in prison for something like that. Is that still happening at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's very troubling, and I think there's a reason that we have overcrowding within the prison population. I don't think punitive punishment is always the way forward. Many of us, as part of our National Women's Coalition, have been looking at, you know, community-based structures for women rather than sending them to prison. How do we look at education? I remember in the pandemic, I won't name names, but one of the MPs that we worked with had mentioned that the highest offence in her ward was mothers shoplifting baby milk.
Right.
You know, and this was in London, and you know, do we really think that women deserve to be incarcerated for shoplifting baby milk if it's an act of desperation? And Calpol was another thing mentioned. Again, very expensive formulas and medication. So it's as a society we need to reflect on our our views of incarceration, our views on rehabilitation, and what we think the most effective means of that is. And within that framework, as a Muslim community, we need to also have a very honest reflection of preventative measures. How do we educate our communities rather than saying these subjects are off-bound? How do we have those very honest conversations within schools, community centres, our masajid? How do we address things head on and no longer hide behind the veneer of the unacceptability? We can't talk about this.
I mean, one of the things that I've been working on for many, many years in my other role as deputy chair until 2 weeks ago of the government's advisory group on hate crime was restorative justice. Now, I mean, this is a whole new subject area. We don't have enough time to talk about it, but maybe we can talk about it next time. But I mean, Fahra, I want you to just have the last word on this, and that is your future. You know, how would you like to see your future develop and grow? You know, I mean, I presume you want to go into work, you want to go back into education, I presume. You want to go and find a job somewhere, sort of, you know, I don't know what your family situation is like, but, you know, is that like everybody else would like to do that, wouldn't they? I mean, that's normal human desire.
I think I do want to work. Alhamdulillah, I am working.
Oh yes, subhanallah.
I'm working. So I have studied as well. So I've done level 2 qualifications. I've done level 3 in computing. I was accepted at university on software engineering.
Oh wow, software engineering.
Software engineering.
Wow.
But I think a lot of the credit should go to the Muslim Women in Prison project, because it's their support that got me where I needed to get to.
Right.
Especially Sophia, because she's actually, it was that nurturing and that care and the love that she showed, and every day it's always a phone call every single day to see if I'm okay, to see what I'm doing on a day-to-day. So it's that nurturing, that care, and it's that support that women need to know that there's somebody there on the other end.
Right.
Because when you know there's somebody there, then you can rely on them. Then that's a genuine care that people need.
And you're obviously, mashallah, you're wearing a niqab now, you know, and is that something you've adopted after you came out of the prison service, and you use that sort of as to make you feel more comfortable, right, being a Muslim woman, I presume?
Yes.
Right. And how do you feel some of your colleagues, you know, non-Muslim colleagues, react to you?
It's probably a shock to them, but I think it's me.
You feel comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and may Allah give you strength, and I hope Allah will give you the ability to do what you want to do, and hopefully software engineering. There's no way I'm going to come and talk to you because I'm useless at computing and things like that. Absolutely. I hope you found this episode of Real Talk, talking about Muslim women prisoners, of some interest and some value. As Sophia and I've done this about 3 times. There was a short video, but unfortunately we couldn't, for technical reasons, we couldn't show it to you. And that sort of really gave the message about, you know, some of the challenges that Sophia and her team have faced. Inshallah, we'll be coming back to this subject, you know, in due course again. Unfortunately, we are seeing more and more our members of our community, both men and women, ending up in the prison system. When the next report comes out about young women under 25, I'll invite Sophia back again and we'll talk about it in more detail, inshallah. I hope you've enjoyed it. In the meantime, I wish you all the best, and Allah take care of you and look after you, and please make du'as for all of us, particularly for Farah, that Allah gives us strength. In the meantime, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, I'll see you next week.